on the air with Wall Street sweating it big time, worried that we could be on the brink of a global banking crisis because right now overseas, another country is talking about backstopping a bank that's really going through it. But is this kind of panic a blip? Or is it the real thing? We're going to break that down. Plus, we may get our own look at what went down between a Russian jet and a U.S. drone over the Black Sea. The new details we are just now getting, and I mean 2 minutes ago, from the Pentagon, and what we're also hearing from the State Department. Plus, the head of a top all-women's college says she will not allow transgender men and non-binary people into the school, even though the students want that. We'll tell you why. Plus, 2 new foods are joining the so-called Dirty Dozen, what you should know about what's in them and whether it actually for real matters all that much. Plus, in tonight's original, we're bringing you back to a group working to fight homelessness in California, highlighting how hard it is to help everyone find their American dream. And later in the show, Aaron Rodgers says he wants to be a New York Jet, so why isn't he? How the controversial quarterback is sucking up the sports world's oxygen yet again later on in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and right now Wall Street is freaking out that a so-called contagion spreading from the complete collapse of Silicon Valley Bank is happening as we speak. But should their freak out also be your freak out? Let's figure that out, running through what we're learning today. You've got the Dow and the S&P ending the day in the red. The European markets closed down even more because of big trouble at Credit Suisse, a huge investment bank. And listen, the worry is real. Why? Because this key European economist said Credit Suisse is a weak link, warning this is not just a Swiss problem, but a global one. Now, Credit Suisse is no stranger to controversy, let's put it that way. This is a short list of the trouble it's had this past year when it had its biggest losses since the 2008 financial crisis. Clients have pulled out about $100 billion in assets in the last few months. And the bank's gotten tangled up in criminal issues, too, with a conviction in connection to a cocaine money laundering case. Thing is, we're talking about a lot of money here. On the left and in the middle, you see Signature and Silicon Valley Bank. Those are the two that just collapsed, the ones based in the U.S. Add those up, you are still not as big as Credit Suisse. The company's CEO tells CNBC's Hallie Gamble today they don't need help.
Would you rule out some kind of government assistance in future?
That's not the topic. Look, we are regulated. We have a strong capital ratios, very strong balance sheet. We are all hands on deck.
Okay, but help may be on the way. We're just now learning that Switzerland's version of the Fed may help Credit Suisse if they need it. They're saying there's no immediate danger right now. And these issues in the banking world are starting to spill into other worlds, like the oil industry. Prices are at their lowest in more than a year. The big question right now, right, is this going to be bad for your budget? And are we seeing the beginning of a 2008 repeat? Caleb Silver is joining us now. So let's start there, Caleb. We can talk all day about what's going on in the markets, right, and in the banking world and all that. That world is typically not our world, right? The world that I live in, that you live in, that I think most of our viewers live in. At what point should the red alert be going off that this contagion thing, this contagion concern is real and not just a blip? Or is this market panic, but not regular people's panic?
Yeah, we want our banks to be boring. They've been anything but boring over the past week, and really this has gone back a couple of months. So no, this is not a repeat of 2008. The biggest banks in the country and the biggest banks in the world are in pretty good financial shape, unless everybody starts pulling their money out all at once, and everyone's not going to start pulling their money out all at once. We have some of these regional banks. We have SVB, we have Signature Bank, and other banks being seized by regulators because their balance sheets were in terrible shape. That doesn't mean that's going to happen to all banks. You just talked about what the issues with Credit Suisse. They've had issues for the past several years. Their balance sheet doesn't look great either, and they didn't get a big investment they were counting on. It looks like they might have to be bailed out by the Swiss government, but this does not mean your bank down the street and some of the biggest banks in the country are facing something similar.
And is that going to be the operative thinking for a while now, right, Caleb? Like, in other words, should we all feel good that these issues with this Swiss bank aren't going to start to seep into our banks, our money, our wallets?
Yeah, unless we hear that some of the biggest banks in the country and some of the biggest investment banks are really deeply invested in Credit Suisse. We know it's widely held as a publicly traded company, but it's not widely held by American investors in particular. So if it starts bleeding into other banks and it hurts their balance sheets and they need more help from the government or the FDIC or the Fed, that becomes a bigger and bigger problem. But so far, the Fed, the Treasury, and the FDIC have showed that they're ready to back up U.S. banks to protect depositors.
Do you get the sense that people are tightening up on spending just in case? Because some new numbers out today shows that people spent less in February at the store than they did the month before.
Yeah, retail sales were a little bit softer than we expected. They were also a little bit softer in December and November. A lot of the holiday sales pulled forward. Consumers are getting kind of exhausted. Credit card APRs are at 22, 23%. Credit card debt is at an all-time high. We're tired of high prices. We're tired of inflation, but this is what we're facing, and now the Fed's going to have to make a decision on interest rates next week.
Caleb Silver, appreciate you. Appreciate the call to not panic. That's always a good one. Let's hope our banks get back to being boring, as you put it, soon. Appreciate it. And what will be the biggest court decision on abortion since Roe versus Wade was overturned? A federal judge in Texas today sounded kind of skeptical about letting people keep having access to the abortion pill. This is a major, major case, and one that we're not going to get a decision on for a while. It's part of a lawsuit filed by anti-abortion groups that looks to overturn the FDA's approval of mifepristone, which is a pill used for medication abortions. These plaintiffs are basically arguing, hey, the FDA, they say, didn't properly evaluate how safe this drug is when it was approved 23 years ago. So they want it pulled off the market. The judge really pressed on that safety point in questioning in court today. This could affect a lot of people. More than half of women who end their pregnancies do so with this kind of medication. It is the first pill in a 2-pill treatment. So if access to it is cut off, people trying to get abortions and their providers would only be left to choose between either a surgical procedure or taking the second medication only, off-label, something it hasn't been approved for. You can imagine this is getting tons of attention in Texas today. People were showing up at the courthouse, including protesters, against this lawsuit. Listen.
In our post-Roe world, medication abortion is one of the last access that millions of women and pregnant people across this country have.
We're running history back the wrong direction.
Morgan Chesky is joining us now live from Texas. So, Morgan, help us read the tea leaves here, because the Biden administration, which is defending this pill, says that the other side doesn't have any standing here. The judge was asking a lot of questions, though, that could be an indication that he may be more sympathetic to the plaintiffs than the other side.
Yeah, Hallie, potentially here. And the judge ended the proceedings today asking both sides to continue to submit case law and files in the days and weeks ahead. So that gives us some sort of a potential timeline here on when this Trump-appointed judge, Matthew Kacsmaryk, may be making a decision on what took place inside this Amarillo courtroom. But I do want to show you, of course, one of the things that's been center stage here, mifepristone, the FDA and the government, as you mentioned, arguing on behalf of its effectiveness for the last 20 years or so. In fact, I want to show you what the American Medical Association had to say about that very medication, essentially saying that it's been used in large part across the entire country, and major adverse effects are, as you can see, exceedingly rare. We're talking about 0.3% of cases. We, of course, also have the risk of patient death from this medication. Abortion is near zero, 5 in 1 million. Mifepristone, of course, the first pill taken in a 2-pill regimen for this medication abortion proceeding. And, Hallie, both sides had 2 hours to make their pitch to the judge today. We do know the plaintiff went first. It was represented in large part by this group, this alliance of Hippocratic Medicine based in Tennessee. Hallie, they established a presence here in Amarillo back in August of 22. And that presence, combined with a local physician, is kind of what paved the way for this lawsuit to take place in this courtroom. A quick point to note here, Hallie.
Yeah.
Had this lawsuit been filed in the Dallas area, it could have been one of several federal judges that could have heard it. But by filing it here, there was only one federal judge, that Trump appointee, who would have been hearing the arguments.
That's an interesting point here, Morgan. There's a lot to this, right? We talk about this scale and the scope of this, the stakes here, and like it's such a cliche to say like high stakes case, right? It legit is, not just because of the abortion access piece of it, but also the FDA has a lot at stake here. Again, the argument that the plaintiffs are making is that the FDA didn't properly approve this drug 2 decades ago. So if the judge finds in favor of this group bringing the lawsuit, it would be basically an unprecedented ruling against the FDA writ large, right?
Absolutely. National implications from a courtroom right here in Amarillo. I do want to real quickly show you a map nationally on where things stand right now when it comes to medication abortions here. You can see that 22 states right now have clinician-prescribed abortions, and then you have 15 others where that has to be physician prescribed. But those orange states that you see there right now, that is where it's outright banned here, Hallie. And as you can see, Texas, one of those states. Hallie?
Morgan Chesky live for us there in Amarillo. Morgan, thank you so much. By the way, timeline-wise, still weeks, right? Weeks, if not months, we think?
Likely.
Morgan Chesky, thanks. So listen, we may actually see soon what it looked like when a Russian jet apparently hit a U.S. drone over the Black Sea in a collision that has the military and diplomats scrambling. And the defense secretary saying late tonight this is going to prove that they're telling the truth about what happened. Tons of new details coming out on this today. Let's get to them. The defense secretary saying he spoke with his Russian counterpart about this. The two hadn't talked before this in months. In the last couple of minutes, we're also hearing that the guy on the other side of your screen, General Mark Milley, talked with his counterpart as well. Very few details coming out on that conversation. We'll hope to have them later on. Secretary Austin says they're looking to declassify video of this collision. Remember, Russia denies hitting this drone. That's why the video will matter. That's why it's important. General Milley also says the drone is probably pretty much worthless now, but recovery is going to be tough because the U.S. doesn't have ships in the Black Sea. We are also hearing now on the diplomatic side from the Secretary of State now for the first time about what happened, since this is, of course, a ball that is in his court, the diplomatic court. Tony Blinken is condemning Moscow, but he says it's too early to really fully point fingers.
At this point, to motive or to intent, but what I can say very clearly is this was a reckless and unsafe action.
Keir Simmons is joining us now live. And Keir, a lot of movement on this today, right? Because the tone that it seems like the U.S. is trying to take and signaling out is like that this was incompetence, that they're looking to maybe not escalate this situation, but they do have very serious concerns about this. Give us the view from the Russian perspective. They're denying that this collision even happened, but boy, if there's video, that's going to show it clear as day.
Yes, it will. Look, there's lots we still don't know. As you rightly mentioned, we don't know what Lloyd Austin said to Defense Minister Shoigu when they spoke. We don't know what Mark Milley has said to Gerasimov, the head of the Russian military. But we can guess, can't we? We can imagine the kinds of conversations that were had. And just to keep in mind, Hallie, that this is strategic in many ways. The Americans want to keep flying drones. The Russians don't want them to fly the drones. Why is that? Well, I think we really got the best insight actually from the Russian ambassador after that meeting in Washington, where he said the US takes photos, takes images, which they then pass to Kyiv, which they then use to attack our forces. So the Russians targeting this US drone had a purpose. Now, what we don't know, but what I think is interesting, we don't know the detail. We haven't seen the video yet. We're waiting to see the video. But what I think is interesting is this idea that the Russians were trying to pour fuel on the drone. Maybe they were trying to incapacitate it. And then I think what you're seeing between the lines there is the Americans trying to figure out whether, in fact, the Russians kind of accidentally hit the propeller of this drone. But honestly, once again, the Russians' ambition here will be to try to prevent these Reaper drones from getting close to the area where the conflict is taking place, because those drones are useful to NATO and therefore useful to the Ukrainians.
It's a good point, Keir. Let me play a little bit more of what we heard from Defense Secretary Austin late this afternoon. Watch.
The United States will continue to fly and to operate wherever international law allows. And it is incumbent upon Russia to operate its military aircraft in a safe and professional manner.
What's also notable here is the Ukrainian perspective of this, because they say, hey, look at this. This shows that Russia is trying to pull the U.S. into this conflict here and expand it. That's the perspective from Kyiv.
Yeah, I think they have a point. I do think that potentially this does show some desperation by the Russians. They're struggling on the battlefield. Now they're trying to attack a drone to try to gain some kind of momentum. Now that today, by the way, Hallie, just to wrap up, they're talking about racing to try and get to this drone, while the US is saying, well, there's not much left there and we've deleted all the information. So more Russian trolling there, just in the waters, and also rhetorically speaking, more rhetoric. And even from President Putin, who's talking about the relationship between the US and Russia at the worst ever. I mean, he has a talent for stating the obvious, really.
Keir Simmons, I know there's going to be more to come on this story, too. Thank you. Out west here in the United States, one of the biggest school districts in the country could be getting ready to shut down for days because thousands of teachers and school workers are getting ready to walk out in L.A. They're going to announce tonight, just a couple hours from now, when exactly that strike will be. We're talking about two unions representing a grand total of 65,000 teachers, along with people like counselors, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, custodians. They're both in these really tense contract negotiations with the Los Angeles School District. Nobody's seeing eye to eye here on stuff like raises and what the minimum pay should be. This is not the first walkout we've seen in L.A. There was that huge 6-day strike back in 2019. And it's not even just Los Angeles. Teachers in Texas, we've seen rally at the Capitol in just the last 48 hours, also trying to get more money, trying to get better teaching conditions, as we've seen and talked about these teacher shortages all across the country. Nyla Charles is in downtown Los Angeles, where that rally is going to begin. I know it's still in the sort of pre-rally phase. It's going to pick up over the next hour or so. Talk us through these tensions, what we expect, and where this goes.
Well, Hallie, yeah, they're starting to gather behind me. Those are teachers and the educational workers, like you mentioned, and they're really just sharing the sentiments we've seen across the country, that those educational workers want to get paid more, they want better benefits, and they want more staffing. And say that helps them, but it also helps students and creates a better learning environment for everyone involved. Here, just so you can get a sense, here in Los Angeles, the average apartment costs about more than $2,000 a month. And the educational workers, like custodians and bus drivers, they make on average, according to the union, about $25,000, and teachers make anywhere from about $60,000 to $69,000. But both of those workers say they are struggling to make ends meet. Listen to what one of the teachers we spoke to was saying today.
I have a colleague, and she right now has to babysit after work every day just to keep a roof over her head. So many of my colleagues have to have a roommate. They have to work more than one job, and it's just not right.
The superintendent here in Los Angeles says that they have offered about half of the salary increase the workers are asking for, but the negotiations are still at a standstill. Hallie?
Now, you've laid out, I think, really well, of course, the teacher's perspective, the administration's perspective, but talk to me about, like, kids and parents, because one thing we know is that this pandemic has crushed kids at school, right? The learning loss has been very real. You've got some tests from around the country showing 20-year lows. I mean, this is real stuff that kids are dealing with. How much is that a factor for parents here who are now looking at the possibility that their kids could go days without being in the classroom, or at least without being in the classroom with their usual teachers?
Yeah, it's a struggle for parents because they're put between a hard place, because a lot of them are saying that they support the teachers, they support educational workers, say they deserve more money, but they don't want their kids to suffer in the process. The union says that they're proposing a strike that would be about 3 days, and the teacher I spoke to says in that time, she does not expect students learning to suffer. She says during the pandemic, they went longer without school, so she says it's not an issue for teachers to help students catch up after 3 days of not being able to go back to school. Hallie?
Nyla Charles live for us there in Los Angeles. Nyla, thank you. The folks in charge of keeping us all safe when we're flying are getting together in Virginia today, trying to figure out what's going on with all these dangerous close calls on runways. And while we heard a lot of important people give a lot of speeches acknowledging that, yes, this is a problem, we didn't hear many answers right now about why this keeps happening and what they're going to do about it. And that is frustrating for the head of the NTSB, whose agency has to investigate all this. Listen.
The NTSB has issued 7 recommendations on runway collisions that have not been acted upon. One is 23 years old and still appropriate today. How many times are we going to have to issue the same recommendations over and over and over again?
Take a look at this map. There have been at least 6 incidents just since the start of this year that the NTSB, her agency, is investigating, where in some cases there was a legit risk of collision that could have been catastrophic. This is all in addition to and separate from the scary close calls we've seen while planes are in the air, and the industry, as you see here, still dealing with bad behavior from passengers on planes. There's been a little less of that since mask mandates went away. NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is outside Reagan National Airport, just outside Washington, D.C. here. And Gabe, I'm going to be honest with you. We're looking at this story today, right, as news people talking about this safety summit, as they call it. And we're going, what came from it, right? Like, what's the big takeaway? What's the big deliverable? Because, yes, there was a lot of discussion here, but you heard it from the head of the NTSB going, we've been talking for years. We've been issuing recommendations for years, and yet we're still in this position. What's up?
Well, Hallie, you know, a lot of talk and little action in Washington. Surely you jest. But yes, this summit did get underway. And it is the FAA, in a way, trying to get ahead of this, right? They've noticed that there have been several of these incidents, at least a half a dozen of them just so far this year. And I spoke with the head of the NTSB, who says that there have been more than 1,600 runway incursions, so-called runway incursions now, compared to 1,300, 5 years ago. So they are on the rise. The question is what to do about it. And you heard the head of the NTSB, you just played some sound from her, talking about how the NTSB is frustrated that some of these recommendations that they've been saying for years have not been acted upon. Something else that they brought up today is this issue of cockpit voice recorders. Hallie, these devices only capture 2 hours of audio in the cockpit, and then they are overwritten. The NTSB wants them to capture 25 hours of audio so that they can better investigate these incidents. But certainly a lot of questions being raised. Unclear how many answers actually came of this summit today, Hallie.
Okay, you are far more diplomatic than me in laying that out, Gabe. Thank you. I mean, I get your point here. What was interesting here is we've talked a lot. I mean, I think when we think about things that happen on planes, one of the big things over the course of the last couple of years has been people behaving badly, people not doing what they should be doing or acting, frankly, like jerks here. That's happened less since mask mandates went away, but it was not a big focus today. How much are you getting the sense that that kind of thing is a factor for what officials are thinking about and looking at?
Well, there are certainly a lot of factors that may be overstressing the system, right? And that is something that the head of the NTSB says that they will take a look at. But there are other factors as well, including, questions about training, demand that has surged since the COVID pandemic and since, the restrictions, the COVID restrictions were lifted. Now there is this incredible surge in demand. Now, the FAA acting administrator, speaking to our colleague Lester Holt, he did say that passenger misbehavior will not be tolerated, that is a focus for them. And certainly it is on the mind of many air industry workers, including pilots and flight attendants. Take a listen to what one of them had to say.
It worries you going to work not knowing how somebody's going to respond to you or how they're going to act on board the aircraft. And I think anything that is happening in our society, we're going to see on board the aircraft.
And so certainly, Hallie, so a lot of questions being raised about this uptick in these runway incursions, so to speak, over the last couple of months. But airline industry experts do say that flying is still incredibly safe. The question becomes, are we becoming too complacent? The FAA says today's summit, they were trying to get ahead of this. Hallie?
And that's important context too, right, Gabe? Like, it is still very, very safe to fly. They just want to make sure it's as safe as it possibly can be. Gabe Gutierrez, live for us at Reagan. Thank you, friend. Down south, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis is getting a personal invitation today to visit Ukraine after saying that the money the U.S. gives to them is not, in his words, a vital interest for the U.S. So the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry is like, okay, well, hey, come on over to get, in their words, a deeper understanding of Russia's full-scale invasion and the threats that poses to U.S. interests. Ukraine is not thrilled. Neither are some of DeSantis's fellow Republicans who serve in Congress. Senators like Mississippi's Roger Wicker, the top GOP senator on the Armed Services Committee. NBC News caught up with him not too long ago. Listen.
I'm very disturbed that he feels that way. I would call on all of our potential presidential candidates to be very, very careful and considered in terms of making statements of that nature.
And Senator Wicker is alluding to something here, that this may be a kind of preview of what's to come in the Republican race for the White House, the issues at play, since DeSantis, who's been flirting with the 2024 run, is getting closer to committing to it. He's making trips to Iowa. There's campaign-style speeches. He's asking for big money from donors. NBC's Vaughn Hilliard is joining us now from West Palm Beach, Florida. Obviously, Governor DeSantis' state and also the backyard of somebody who is officially in this race, Donald Trump. DeSantis isn't even in this race, and already there are divisions in the party over one of the big foreign policy issues of the moment. It feels like this tells us a lot about where we're headed over the next 18 months.
Right. It really used to be Republicans that took a really direct, hard tack on issues like this. When we're talking about Russia, you're talking about Russian aggression into Ukraine. And what you hear Ron DeSantis outlining is questioning whether it is in the U.S. interest to provide the type of aid, military resources, and financing to defend Russia or defend Ukraine from Russia here. And it was actually Governor DeSantis' own senator here, Marco Rubio, who also spoke out in the last 24 hours, who suggested that to suggest that it's just a territorial dispute between Russia and Ukraine would be like suggesting that the U.S. moving into the Bahamas or into Canada would be just a territorial dispute, and suggested that perhaps Governor DeSantis, as a governor, has a lack of experience with foreign policy. And so that's where, when you even compare Ron DeSantis to Donald Trump, who I directly asked a week and a half ago while at CPAC, I asked him the question, would he support the U.S. continuing to provide consistent aid to Ukraine? And he sort of sidestepped the question, didn't say outright no, but he said that Europe should take a greater share of responsibility, which is showing that Ron DeSantis has taken even further right tack. When you compare that to likes of Hallie, Nikki Haley and others who are clearly on the side of providing that continued support to Ukraine, it's a clear gap in what could look like a divided Republican field here for 2024.
I also want to ask you, when you talk about the divided Republican field here, we are seeing some divisions between Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. That's not a shocker. There's a new NBC News exclusive only on our network today showing that a Trump-aligned super PAC is filing an ethics complaint against Ron DeSantis. They're saying, hey, you can't go campaign and raise a bunch of money without actually launching a campaign. They say that violates state election laws. We know that Donald Trump's been upping the rhetoric. A legal fight, a little bit different. Help us understand.
Right, and our own Matt Dixon, who is based in Tallahassee for us, who has been covering Governor DeSantis, outlined that Governor DeSantis has actually raised more than $10 million as part of a political committee here in the state of Florida. And there's also a new federal super PAC that has been launched in support of him. And what Trump's super PAC is contending is that Ron DeSantis is essentially a presidential candidate traveling around the country, raising money, selling a book, and that therefore he should file as such. Of course, the irony of this is just a year ago, there were Democratic groups that were calling on Donald Trump to register as official candidate and calling for the FEC to investigate him for running a shadow presidential campaign. So this really comes full circle, and it's now that Donald Trump is putting pressure on his potential Republican rival, DeSantis. Hallie?
Vaughn Hilliard soaking it up there down in West Palm. Thank you, Vaughn. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, an attempted helicopter robbery gone wrong at least 4 times. Look at that. We're going to explain later in the local. Plus, we're getting a look at what future moonwalkers could wear. Look at those. Look at the fit. Is that what the kids would say? We'll have more on that coming up. We're hearing for the first time from the head of Wellesley College after students voted that the school should let transgender men and all non-binary people apply. This matters because Wellesley is traditionally an all-women's school, but the student vote is not binding, meaning the school doesn't have to actually follow it, and they're not going to. We're learning today that the school's president is saying in a statement, there is no plan to revisit our mission as a women's college or our admission policy, adding they'll continue to build an inclusive academic community. Wellesley says they give an education to, and I'm quoting here, women who will make a difference in the world. The school's alumni includes people like Hillary Clinton, Madeleine Albright, just to name a few. Right now, the school accepts transgender women, not men, and non-binary people who are, and again, I'm quoting here, assigned female at birth and who feel like they belong in our community of women. I want to bring in Stephanie Goss to get into this. And it is an interesting thing here, Steph, for a school like Wellesley, which seems to be walking a fine line here, emphasizing both inclusivity, but also the importance of sort of women being present and being comfortable at school.
And you know, Hallie, a snapshot really in just how complicated this conversation over gender is in our country as a whole. But take a look at Wellesley College. It was opened in 1875. The whole idea of it was, let's open up the doors to women who aren't getting a fair shake in education, higher education, anywhere else, and let's give them that space, and then let's give them opportunities in the professional world as well. Wellesley became a center for scientific research back then. Fast forward 150 years, and you have a student body that says, hey, you know, women need some protections, but really the gender and genders that are facing the worst kind of ridicule and difficulty right now are transgender people, men and women, as well as people who are non-binary. And we think that that is in the spirit of Wellesley, and you should let them in. Now, the school, as you say, already admits transgender women and applicants who are non-binary. They also allow the students who transition while they're there to stay at the school, but they draw the line at this interesting point when it comes to transgender men. They are not allowed to apply to Wellesley, and they are holding firm to that, even though the student body, the majority of them, we don't know the percentages, want something different.
You make, I think, a noteworthy point here, Steph, when you talk about how this is, in some ways, a microcosm of a broader conversation that is happening, and a sometimes complicated conversation around gender, especially when you talk about this generation, Gen Z, 18 to 29. More people that age identify as trans or non-binary compared to people who are older. You see the numbers here, right? Partly, one would think that is because we're talking about it more. There is more acceptance in society, although there's still obviously a long way to go on that front. What is the broader implication for these all-men or all-women colleges that exist when there are students who are saying, hey, we want everybody to be welcomed here?
Well, in higher education, there aren't many of them. First of all, let's say the all-women's colleges, a lot of them have gone co-ed and don't have to grapple with this problem. But clearly, this is an existential issue for them, and they will have to face at some point this difficult question of why are we letting some people in and not other people in? And you will see these fights continue, and it could be the end of these institutions, certainly, inevitably. But it's also a generational thing, right? I mean, the generation that controls this school saying, we're not ready to go there yet, but the generation attending the school says, oh, yes, we are.
Stephanie Gosk, live for us on that. Steph, thank you for being on the Wellesley beat for us tonight. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, really bad flash floods have turned deadly, killing at least 10 people in southeast Turkey. And yes, southeast Turkey, the same place that was devastated by those earthquakes last month that killed tens of thousands of people. It's just horrific to see. You have so many people still living in tents and converted shipping containers because their homes were damaged. Rescue teams are still searching for survivors in this flooding. Number 2, the former LA mayor, Eric Garcetti, is on track to be the next ambassador to India after a Senate vote. This has been a years-long drama situation over on the Hill. He was first nominated by President Biden back in 2021. It's taken nearly 2 years to confirm him because of accusations he ignored sex assault and harassment allegations against his former top aide. Garcetti denies any wrongdoing. Number 3, NASA astronauts are going to have some new spacesuits when they head to the moon for the Artemis 3 mission in 2025. Look at that. Not the, like, puffy white suits you often see. These are sleeker, and listen to this. They're supposed to fit better on women specifically. This is a mission that's going to send the first woman to the moon, along with the first person of color as well. Number 4, a cement cast of Kobe Bryant's hand and footprints now has a permanent home. Look at this. They were installed outside the TCL Chinese Theater in LA today. The Bryant family, the Lakers president were there. They were talking about the superstar's legacy. You can see it was a special moment for them. Number 5. All right, Labs, step aside. There is a new top dog in America. That's right, close to my heart, and apparently many of yours, Frenchies, are now the #1 dog breed in this country. About 108,000 Frenchies were registered last year, unseating the Labrador Retriever after the Labs spent a record 31 years at the top. Are you a Lab person? Are you a Frenchie person? Are you both? Are you a cat person? Much to discuss. Also, something to discuss, some of your favorite fruits and veggies that may have made this year's new list of Dirty Dozen produce. That's kind of the name here, meaning there's some of the fruits and vegetables with the highest traces of pesticides. Blueberries and green beans are on the list now this year, along with what's been on there before. Strawberries and spinach right at the top. You can see blueberries and green beans coming in at 11 and 12 there. This report found that nearly 90% of them had some concerning findings. Again, this is for non-organic produce. The Environmental Working Group puts out this list. They analyzed thousands of samples from dozens of produce that is not organic, that's already been washed and peeled and scrubbed. And after all that, they still found traces of 251 pesticides. Obviously, that stuff can be toxic. Research has shown that there's a pretty clear link between pesticides and health issues. Dr. Mario Ramirez is joining us now to talk about what we should be doing in these cases. Dr. Ramirez, it's great to see you with us. Thank you. I think there's a lot to this because First and foremost, I think we have to say having access to organic produce is a privilege, and it is an access that a lot of people in this country do not have. The risk of not eating fresh fruits and veggies at all, isn't that higher than the risk of not eating organic fruits and veggies that may not have some of these trace amounts of pesticides?
You're absolutely right, Hallie. You know, I think what we worry about as a physician is that what people are going to hear when they read this report is that they should stay away from fruits and vegetables in favor of processed foods. But that's not really the point at all. I think the point that you're making is right, is to make sure that you wash your fruits and vegetables really well. And if you can, then shift to organic foods. But the most important point is to making sure that you're having a well-balanced diet above all else.
In other words, don't not buy the non-organic blueberries just because they're not organic. Is that fair?
That is completely right.
How big of a risk is it, though, these trace amounts of pesticides?
Well, it's important to look at what this report talked about and what it was and what it wasn't. So the report detailed the number of fruits that found these pesticides on the surface. It doesn't detail what the amount is that the consumer is actually taking in. That's not really what that report was designed to disclose. And so I think the key point, as you bring out, is that you want to make sure you're eating a broad base of fruits and vegetables, those that are kind of both on the list and those that are sort of on the safer foods list. The key is to really make sure that you're washing those foods really well.
But wasn't some of the fruits and vegetables in this study or in this report that EWG put out, they were already washed? So what should we be doing? Are we like, should I be using that veggie wash that they sell? Should I be dumping vinegar on them? Like you see the TikTok hacks of like baking soda in a strainer, like whatever. What really matters here?
So the most important thing is just to make sure that you're using regular water on your fruits and vegetables. That's been shown to remove 99% of the contaminants on there.
That seems too easy to be true.
Like you said, there are lots of detergents and other things out there that you can use. Those will also tend to leave residues on the food. The best thing you can do is just wash them off with regular water and give them a good scrub.
Do you, as a physician, worry at all about the kind of branding that has become so sort of commonplace here, the Dirty Dozen, the Clean 15, what that does to people who might live in food deserts, what that does to people's attitudes about fresh food?
I do. What I worry about when we talk about these, sort of soundbite reports is that people don't take the time to dive into what the report actually says. And the most important thing, far and away from a physician standpoint, is to make sure that you're eating a well-balanced diet that has protein, has fruits, has vegetables. And when people hear reports like this and they live in food deserts or some of these other places, I personally worry that the message they're hearing is, I should stay away from those things. And that's absolutely incorrect.
So get out, get the produce, get it if you can, organic, and if not, still get it anyway.
Absolutely, Hallie.
Dr. Ramirez, thank you, appreciate it. We like to hammer a point home here on NBC News Now, thank you. When we come back, we're looking at how one group is trying to help folks grab even a little bit of the American dream, just a place to live. That newest report in our series, right here, is next. So tonight's Original Now with in-depth reporting on a topic we've been watching. And tonight, it's the American Dream. It's our new series unpacking the promises that this country makes and whether those promises are actually coming to fruition in the real world. This week, it's all about housing. And on the past couple of days, we've reported on how things are getting more expensive. Things are getting more competitive. There's not as much availability. All of it is squeezing the housing market. And that same pressure is in part contributing to homelessness. There are more than 580,000 Americans who do not have permanent housing, no fixed address at this moment. NBC's Jake Ward, over a year ago, when we first launched this show, went to check out a housing initiative in California's Santa Clara County that's trying to help people get on their feet. We have sent him back now to see how those folks are doing when it comes to the promises of the American dream. Watch.
Here, let's play with these ones.
For Jordan Silvera and her kids, after months of sleeping in hotels, on couches, and in her car, stable housing at the House of Grace in San Jose was everything.
So this is actually the first apartment that me and my kids came and entered through.
Wow. You walked through this door, yes. and this was your first sort of refuge.
Yeah, it was just like, this is where we live. You know, it was very comforting.
But for her and more than 500,000 Americans, shelter is not enough.
They taught us life skills classes. We had financial literacy offered at the Career Center.
Because you need to pick up skills that you just hadn't had the chance to develop before.
Yeah, and I hadn't had a bank account since I was like still 19 years old.
The risk of becoming homeless in America has gone up for more than a decade, according to the National Alliance to End Homelessness. And the rising price of rent coupled with inflation pressure is not helping. Just a $100 increase in median rent was associated with a 9% increase in the estimated homelessness rate, according to a 2020 report by the U.S. Government Accountability Office. And that means this is not just a shelter problem. City Team, which runs this space, is one of several programs just in this county that literally trains people to stabilize their lives after being unhoused. At the height of the pandemic, we spoke with Maria Castaneda and her family living in city-built tiny homes after a period of homelessness.
There is a heater which keeps us warm, and there's AC too when it was hot, so it's a good thing. Our own bed, warm, so it was pretty good.
Even though it's small, but it's way better than where we were before.
County officials say Maria has since moved on to a rental property and a full-time job.
One of the things that's really impressive about this program is their permanency rate. People staying in housing after, a year is 70%.
County Supervisor Cindy Chavez says that while these 24 shelters and the services around them cost $1.5 million a year, that is nothing compared to the ongoing cost of homelessness.
What we know is that if they're unhoused, we spend almost $65,000 a year per person for them to be unhoused in our community.
Because that's what it costs in services to help them out.
Ambulances, being in custody, hospitals, mental health facilities.
This county alone has allocated $643 million toward 5,000 units of housing. But in a state that is short millions of units, where Governor Gavin Newsom campaigned on closing that gap, housing is not enough.
And the skills needed to survive while you're living in addiction or out on the streets are very different than the skills that are needed to survive while you're working.
And as House of Grace renovates this apartment complex to add 50 more units, the physical space has to be designed not just for families.
And so we're putting in bathtubs in a lot of the units.
But for recovery from the trauma of homelessness.
When women come from, domestic violence situations or even living in a shelter, it can actually be really intimidating to be all alone by yourself in a space.
More comforting somehow to be within arm's reach of your child while they sleep.
Exactly.
Today, Jordan works for City Team, and her son attends school here. Like everyone we spoke to, she says without community, structure, and services, she would not have made it.
Especially when you've just been in that cycle of shame and guilt and depression and all of these things, feeling like a failure. It's hard to get that courage to kind of step into that and know that you're worthy of all those things, like a job and a good life, a car, all these things. I truly believe housing is a part of it, but I think it's so much more than that.
Jake Ward is joining us now. Jake, it is so interesting to see you and your reporting on this over the course of, 14 months here. And the lesson seems to be housing isn't enough to solve the homelessness crisis. Do you think that's a fair way to put it?
I think that's absolutely correct, Hallie. I mean, that is the thing we really learned. I mean, yes, there are millions of families across the United States that require, housing, structure, shelter, right, is the fundamental thing that we're going to require. But when you really look into it, the reason that a program like that little village of 24 structures requires $1.5 million of funding every year is because you're literally teaching people how to live in a sheltered way again, how to hold down a job, how to, manage a bank account, how to, in some cases, be a parent after years, perhaps, of dealing with mental illness or with substance abuse. And so the structure around it is really the most important thing in getting somebody from being in this, really awful, brutal survival mode into the kind of mode where you can take care of a family and hold down a job and pay your rent. It isn't going to be a matter of just putting people inside shelter. It really turns out that to solve homelessness in this country, we're going to have to teach people how to get past the trauma of homelessness and how to acquire all the skills that you and I take for granted, Hallie.
It's such a smart point. Jake Ward, thank you so much for doing this for us. Really appreciate it. Coming up, police in New York City stepping up security around schools after some shootings near campuses. What they're doing now to try to make kids feel safer. Plus, what one man's calling his big, ugly discovery at a state park in Arkansas. We'll explain what he found later on in The Local. The NYPD is stepping up security around schools in New York today after 3 separate shootings near campuses. In Manhattan, you can see those places on screen right there. We're talking about the area, not too far from Central Park there. Police say 3 people got shot, with all these shootings happening just a few hours apart from each other. And they all happened close to schools while kids were actually sitting in their classrooms. We know 1 person has been arrested so far. Others are still on the run. No idea what the motive is here, but the police think the shootings are gang-related. Here's why this matters, right? Because gun violence is not just threatening kids in this one city in New York. This is a national issue. Between 2000 and 2020, the number of gun-related deaths among kids, teens, and young adults has gone up from almost 7,000 to more than 10,000. Rahema Ellis is joining us now. Rahema, talk about what's happening in New York here, the extra police presence around schools. When you talk to students and parents and people in communities, do they feel any safer from that?
Well, they certainly do feel safer. That there was an increased police presence here yesterday afternoon when the shooting occurred, just a couple blocks from here. And this morning, police were out in full force when school began and later on. School is not in session right now, so that's one of the reasons why you don't see the police. But some students were concerned about the notion that this might be gang-related. Our affiliate talked with a student earlier this morning, and they expressed surprise about it. Take a listen.
Have no gang-related issues in any way.
Really?
Yeah. I've been going here since November. I haven't seen anything like that yet. So it's kind of shocking to happen right in front of the school.
But the fact that the shooting occurred here so close to where these kids are going to school certainly made everybody concerned. It put the school on lockdown for a while police were investigating, and they got a suspect you mentioned. That investigation is still going on. Hallie?
Rahema, you are standing, right, in Manhattan, in New York. It's not just a New York issue, right? Talk about the broader impact of some of this stuff. I mean, I live in D.C., and I'll tell you, an issue here, too, right? I mean, I talk to parents all the time, and when shootings happen near schools, it's a concern, obviously.
Absolutely. It raises the alarm for everybody who's connected with the school. And certainly, we've got a full screen. You can see some of these numbers. They're going in exactly the opposite direction where people want them to go of what the shootings have been like over the past 7 years. You pointed out earlier that killings or deaths by firearms is now the leading cause of death for young people, from kids to teenagers. And so it's not just here in New York City, which of course is a big city, but this is happening all across the country. It is raising alarm bells for people everywhere as they try to figure out what can be done, whether this is gang related or not. The fact that young people have access to weapons is something that is on everybody's mind in terms of how do they make certain that they continue to keep these kids safe. Hallie?
Rahema Ellis live for us there in New York, of course, as the school day is wrapping up. Folks are looking towards tomorrow. Appreciate it. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our West Coast Bureau, California police are investigating after somebody broke into choppers at a Sacramento airport early today and tried to steal one. I mean, you're looking at one of the helicopters that had big damage, but police are not aware of any injuries from the crash. From our Southeast Bureau, a Florida judge has ruled that parts of Miami Beach can change the time of last call for alcohol from 5 a.m. to 2 a.m. Sorry, partiers. It comes after local officials tried a bunch of times to deal with complaints about nightclubs from people who live in the area. The mayor says this will take effect either today or tomorrow. So fewer opportunities for that 4 a.m. tequila shot. Not that anybody watching this knows. Also from our Southern Bureau, the rare 3.29 carat brown diamond that you're seeing right here was found at the crater of Diamonds State Park in Arkansas. It is the biggest diamond found in this park in about a year. The guy who found it says he's going to name it BUD, Bud, Big Ugly Diamond. That's what it stands for. He says he'll sell it, but no word yet on what the price tag will be. Never give up on your dreams if you want to find a diamond at Diamond State Park. Still to come. Nothing is like set yet, but quarterback Aaron Rodgers is telling the world what team he wants to be on, and it's not the Packers. What we know about his intentions, as he puts it. Next. So we are hearing from controversial quarterback Aaron Rodgers, the four-time NFL MVP, who says all of this drama around where he's going to play next year isn't his fault because he's already made up his mind. You gotta love it. They're like, okay, all right, that is big news. Nothing is a done deal, as Rodgers says, but the Jets, look, they're celebrating in a very extremely online way. A bunch of eyeball emojis and a meme from Leonardo DiCaprio from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Corey Robinson joins us now. The Jets are excited. Aaron Rodgers is like, hey, this is where we want to be. At one point, our team watched on YouTube. Our producer, Michael Sullivan, watched on YouTube, and at one point, like 500,000 people were tuning in to this streaming show at 1:30 p.m. on a Wednesday. Clearly, this has captured so many people's attention. Kind of the way, like, it's not the same thing, but you remember the decision from LeBron James taking his talents to South Beach. Like, there are parallels here.
Except for, you know, Aaron Rodgers is in his late 30s. like we're talking about two different sides of your career. But yeah, it's so interesting, Hallie. You know, if I know anything about quarterbacks, they understand the power of media. And you talk about Aaron Rodgers, he really understands the power of media. You know, if you follow his career, he'll say things that, you know, he knows will filter into the locker room. He knows that the head coach is listening. He knows that the GM is listening. So he's very, very, very careful with his words. And like LeBron James, you know, he's very acutely aware of what, you know, he knows the impact of what he says. So I think the key word here, Hallie, is intention.
The key word is intention, and that's something we'll be watching for. But what's also part of the Aaron Rodgers saga story is the way that he has in some ways become kind of a lightning rod in more recent years. He's been really outspoken with COVID. He clearly, as you say, knows and understands the power of media. He clearly has some raw emotions when it comes to the way that his time with Green Bay is ending.
Yeah,
apparently ending.
It's really hard to kind of put this into words for a lot of people because, you know, he was the guy for so long, right? And you're a four-time MVP. You just came off of back-to-back MVP seasons not too long ago. To be replaced in your job is hard. But especially when you feel like you're playing at a high level and you still got gas in the tank, that's even harder. So I could understand why he probably feels that way. But at the end of the day, you know, it's professional sports. So I understand he's probably playing the leverage game just like the Packers are. Yeah. But we don't know what's going to happen.
I have to say, I do a little resent your late 30s dig. Like, I get your point, but as a person in around that age range, like Tom Brady he's in his 40s, right?
I know, but yes, that was my, I'll take the L. That was my bad. You know, I just think with LeBron.
You take the L, Corey.
Yeah, I'm just taking the L.
We need more W from you from the future. Corey Robinson, thank you so much. I'm sure we'll talk more about Aaron Rodgers at some point. That is a promise, not a threat. Appreciate you. That does it for us for this hour. We've got a lot more coverage picking up right now. Coming on the air with new clapbacks just in from the Russians. As the Pentagon says, there's a very real chance we may actually get to see what went down over the Black Sea. As the U.S. says Russia downed one of its drones. Moscow says it never happened. So will the video prove it? Ahead, what we're just now hearing from a top U.S. general on this question of intent. Plus, another huge bank may be on the ropes, with Switzerland's government saying it might have to step in to help Credit Suisse. So are all these bank issues going to hurt your budget anytime soon? We're going to break that down. And with all those close calls on runways, the feds are looking at new ways to keep you safe in the skies. What we are hearing today from a big summit just across the river in Virginia. Plus, with the Colorado River drying up fast, lawmakers in Nevada are trying something new about just how much water people will be able to use. We're getting a behind-the-scenes look from folks on the ground who are hit the hardest. And could using that map apps on your phone be hurting your brain? Why researchers now say you should find your own way later on in the show. We are just hearing for the first time from Russia's defense ministry, giving their side of the call that went down with the U.S. Defense Secretary today, all about that collision over the Black Sea between a Russian jet and a U.S. drone. It's a collision that has the military and diplomats scrambling. In the last couple of minutes, here's what we're hearing, that the Russians are blaming the U.S. for whatever happened. They're still not saying there actually was a collision. And they're accusing the U.S. of using drones, in their words, in a provocative way. Here's what the Pentagon says. They said they have the video. They have the receipts. And the defense secretary says when that's declassified, it's going to show that the U.S. is telling the truth about what happened. The investigation's only just beginning, but General Mark Milley, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, is addressing that key question about intent. What did Russia mean to do here? Listen.
We know that the intercept was intentional. We know that the aggressive behavior was intentional. We also know it was very unprofessional and very unsafe. The physical contact of those two, not sure yet. That remains to be seen.
Lots of new details on this today include both Secretary Austin and General Milley talking with their Russian counterparts. They're keeping their side of the conversation a little low-key for now, but they hope that someday soon, at some point soon, we're all going to see this declassified video. Remember, Moscow denies hitting this drone. That is why that video is important. Milley also says he thinks that recovering this drone, getting it out from the Black Sea, is going to be hard because the U.S. doesn't have any ships there. But honestly, there's probably not a lot left of the drone that is worth Moscow's time and effort to pick up anyway, even though the Kremlin says that's what they're trying to do. Courtney Cubey has been all over this story from the jump. She's joining us now. Few details on the conversation, right, that Secretary Austin had. Russia is providing more of those new details. Bottom line, though, Court, it does sound like the lines of communication are at least somewhat open right now, which is probably a positive.
Yeah, that's right. So, I mean, look, we're used to not getting a lot of detail in these readouts, but I will say the ones today kind of are next level, no detail. All we really know is that the calls occurred. The one with General Milley doesn't even specifically say that they discussed the incident yesterday. Of course they did, though. That was the reason for the call. But what we do know that there is optimism about the fact that these calls were even scheduled and that each side picked up the phone here. Secretary Austin actually enunciated that. He talked a little bit about that today at the briefing about just how important it is for communication from the two sides. Here's what he had to say.
I think it's really key that that we're able to pick up the phone and engage each other, and I think that will help to prevent miscalculation going forward.
And Hallie, you probably remember, but the last time these two men spoke with their Russian counterparts was late October 2022. It was a time of very high tensions with Russia after Vladimir Putin started talking about potentially using nuclear weapons in Ukraine. There was a full court press by the U.S. to talk them out of it. And the belief in the Biden administration is that it worked. The question is, will this work here? Will this be able to de-escalate the tensions, or is it going to continue?
Well, that's the question, right? It's about de-escalating the tensions, Court. That seems to be the goal of the U.S. here. As we've talked about over the last 24 hours, there is a ball in the diplomatic court now, too. You've got to think, okay, so right now, whatever is left of this drone is sitting in or at the bottom of the Black Sea. It sounds like these defense officials are like, well, the software was blacked out. As for the hardware, the actual, like, meat and potatoes metal piece of it, like, probably not worth the Russians recovering. But the Russians optically kind of want to do that anyway, right?
So there's two pieces here. There's what they could potentially exploit out of this. The software, as you said, that was blacked out. The belief is they can't get anything out of that. And remember, when they brought this drone down, the U.S. did, they glided it. They were able to glide it for a little while. It had no propulsion. The propeller was gone. They were able to glide it a little bit, and then they crash it into the ocean, into the Black Sea, with the goal of smashing it into pieces. So it's not like they self-destruct it, but the goal is to break it into a whole bunch of different pieces so that if it's recovered, if pieces are recovered, it's more and more difficult to potentially put back together. Keep that, and keep in mind there's a very wide debris field, according to defense officials we've spoken with here, and some of it is at depths of 5,000 feet. So difficult recovery, of course, very, very deep in the Black Sea. On top of that, U.S. officials believe that even if the Russians or some adversary were able to get the pieces, put it back together, there wouldn't be a whole lot that they could learn out of it anyway based off of the hardware there. So there's a low concern about this actually being exploited.
And even the optics of, like, the Russians being like, look, we have a piece of that U.S. drone. They're not so worried about that?
They would not like that. I mean, that's it. I think there's more concern about the potential propaganda. If the Russians were able to get it back together and put it together and tape it together and glue it into a one big drone again and stand next to it, the propaganda effect would be, the administration would not like that. But there seems to be a low concern about that really happening as well, Hallie.
And about the sort of national security impact, as you say, less of a concern for them. Courtney Cubey, I am sure we will talk again soon. There just seems to be more to the story every single day. Thanks, Court, for being there for us. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Let's hit the economy now, because Wall Street is freaking out about a so-called contagion spreading from that total collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. They worry that it's happening as we speak. But should their freak out be your freak out also? Let's get into it, because you see the Dow and the S&P ending the day lower after a top economist called big issues at a Swiss bank a global problem. We're talking about Credit Suisse. And these banking issues are starting to spread into other industries like oil, with prices there dropping to their lowest levels in more than a year. Okay, more financial world drama. Does it mean drama for your money, right? What does it mean for your checking and savings account? And is this giving us deja vu vibes from the 2008 financial collapse? Caleb Silver is joining us now. Let me start there. Are you getting 2008 deja vu vibes, or is that way not the same thing as what's happening with Credit Suisse?
Yeah, well, when you hear words like contagion or systemic risk or the FDIC seizing control of banks, you can't not but think about 2008, because that was what was going on back then. That said, big banks and the biggest banks in the country and around the world, minus Credit Suisse, are in a lot healthier shape today than they were back then, and because they have more regulations governing what they have to have in their reserves. That said, when one of the biggest banks in the world, Credit Suisse, has issues like the ones it's having, you can't not think there's going to be some contagion, even psychological contagion, Hallie, and that gets in people's minds. They start worrying about it. They start selling assets like banks, like stocks, and like oil today because they think this can contribute to a broader global slowdown. That said, I don't think it's as bad as it was back then, but we hate to hear these words.
We were just showing how Credit Suisse, this bank that's at the center of today's drama, is, you know, even when you add up Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, it's like almost double the size of those two banks. It's a big bank. We're also finding out, you know, more because Credit Suisse has had issues before. Help us understand what the Swiss government may do, because now late today you have the Swiss government saying, well, their version of the Fed basically saying if there is a bigger problem, we'll be there, maybe not to bail you out, but to backstop you, if you will.
Yeah, don't call it a bailout by any means, but backstop, okay, great, because we may need that if more depositors pull their money out of Credit Suisse, if nobody wants to lend money to Credit Suisse, and these banks loan a lot of money to each other, then they're definitely going to need some sort of a backstop or bailout, because if they go down, they could take some other banks, European banks, with them. And we know that U.S. banks are also invested in European banks. It's very contagious within the banking system. So we want to watch this very closely. That said, the Swiss government and the U.S. government, through the FDIC, the Fed, and the Treasury, are showing that they're willing to back up depositors. So we can't get a run on the bank where you can't get your money out. We're not going to face what we faced in 2008. But the words are scary, and the psychological vibes right now are making investors worried and consumers as well.
Are we going to feel better about this tomorrow? I know you have no crystal ball, but what do you think is going to happen later this week after what we've seen so far this week?
I wouldn't be surprised to see another couple of banks being seized by regulators because they're looking very closely at their balance sheets right now, and the balance sheets of banks are not healthy. One of the big reasons behind that is these rising interest rates over the past 12 months have put pressure on the assets they hold against our deposits. Their books look terrible. That happened to Silicon Valley Bank. It happened a little bit to Signature Bank. It could happen to other banks as regulators look a little bit more closely under the hood and see just how healthy they are.
Caleb Silver, thank you very much. We are waiting on what is going to be the biggest court decision on abortion since Roe versus Wade was overturned last year, a decision that now rests with a federal judge in Texas today who sounded skeptical in a hearing about letting people continue to have access to the abortion pill. We're not going to get to know the decision for a while. It's part of a lawsuit filed by anti-abortion groups. They're trying to overturn the FDA's approval of a drug called mifepristone, which is a pill used for medication abortions. These plaintiffs are arguing basically, hey, the FDA did not properly evaluate how safe this drug is, they say, when it was approved 23 years ago. So they want it pulled off the market. The judge really pushed on that safety point with the defense when he asked about studies that the FDA conducted to approve the pill. If you look at this map, the 22 states in black and gray here, these are the ones where this medication abortion is legal. And a decision against the FDA could affect people in these states also. Morgan Chesky is joining us now. Let's start with the reading of the tea leaves, Morgan, if you will, because it does seem like the judge was pushing really hard on this idea of safety and the approval of this drug. That is the argument that the plaintiffs here, the anti-abortion groups, are pushing.
Yeah, Hallie, you're absolutely right. And during this 4-hour hearing that happened inside this Amarillo courthouse, we had a chance to hear from both sides today. It did begin with the plaintiffs led by that group, Alliance of Hippocratic Medicine. This is a Tennessee-based group, Hallie, who established a presence here in Amarillo back in August of 2022. And that presence, along with an Amarillo physician, kind of paved the way for this lawsuit to be filed in this area. More on why this location was important in just a moment. But one of the questions that the judge asked this group, the plaintiffs, is could they name an instance in which a medication of any kind was essentially pulled from the shelves after being deemed safe for upwards of 20 years. The attorneys representing the plaintiffs were unable to do so. But then the judge also questioned the safety of this medication to those representing the FDA, the government. And as you can see, we have statistics here that basically show that over the last 20 years that the amount of adverse effects due to taking mifepristone are exceedingly rare. We're talking about 0.3% of cases, and that the risk of patient death from medication abortion is near zero, 5 in 1 million. Mifepristone, of course, Hallie, that first pill you take, followed by a second pill that is a different drug that was really not of any topic of conversation here in Amarillo today. Hallie?
What's also so interesting and important about this, Morgan, and I think it's hard to overstate the stakes involved here, is because obviously there's an impact on abortion access. We showed those states where this is going to have an impact. But there's also an impact on the FDA, because if the judge were to rule against the administration here, right, Morgan? If the courts can rescind an approval that the FDA made 20 years ago, for any drug, doesn't that open a pretty big door?
Absolutely, and unprecedented is really the only word you can use to describe this case as it's being heard right now. I want to show you some more information that we have here today that just kind of puts this all in context for us as this case goes forward. The judge saying that he would taking some days and or weeks before making his decision. But look at this, Hallie. Yeah, 54% of all abortion in the United States is that of medication. That would include the use of mifepristone, more than half. So, of course, we're talking about a significant number here. I should add that with the overturning of Roe v. Wade, that number has only gone up. Critics saying this would only further restrict access to abortion nationwide. And that is why so many eyeballs are on what took place inside this Amarillo courthouse today. Hallie?
Super quick, Morgan, I hear yelling and cheering behind you. Are demonstrators still out there today?
There is a group of about a dozen are still here. There was a group this morning. They disbanded, and then they came following the conclusion of arguments today, Hallie. These are pro-choice advocates, and essentially one of their main critiques of this entire proceeding, Hallie, is the fact that it's happening in Amarillo because, according to critics, they say that the plaintiffs essentially judge shopped in this case, choosing this district because there is a lone judge, Matthew Kaczmarek, who would hear the cases here. Of course, he was appointed by President Trump back in 2017. He's volunteered for Republican campaigns in the past, and that is why they're concerned they're not getting a fair shake here. Hallie?
Morgan Chesky, live for us there in Amarillo. Morgan, thank you very much. The people in charge of keeping all of us safe in the sky when we're flying are meeting today for what's being described as a safety summit. They're raising a lot of flags, but they're not putting forward a ton of solutions here. They're talking about the recent wave of close calls as planes are getting ready to take off or land. It's laid out on this map for you. At least 6 incidents just since the start of this year that caused some concern in some cases where planes were at the risk of legit catastrophic collisions. The acting administrator of the FAA says here's what it comes down to. Everybody getting too comfortable after so long without, thankfully, something deadly happening. Watch.
The biggest mistake we can make as an industry is to become complacent. As a safety professional, if you are comfortable, it probably means you're missing something.
NBC's Gabe Gutierrez is outside Reagan National Airport in Washington. So, yes, there is an acknowledgement. This isn't good. We don't want to have these close calls on the runway here. It's their job to keep people safe. The question is, so what are you going to do about it? And we heard from the head of the NTSB who was like, we've been issuing recommendations over and over and over again for years. So what's next?
So, Hallie, I'm looking at my phone because just within the past few moments, there was a readout that just came out of these breakout sessions that industry leaders had throughout the afternoon. And this is actually brand new since I left. So, reading through it, trying to find some specifics here, Hallie, but what they say is that the FAA wants to re-examine runway incursion data to identify underlying factors that led to these incidents. The FAA also now issuing a call to industry to help identify technologies that could augment existing capabilities. So, certainly, Hallie, this is what we talked about earlier. A lot of talk, questions about how much real action will be here. But again, the FAA has been saying that this summit is meant to get ahead of the problem. This is something that they need to get ahead of before something potentially catastrophic could happen. And I did speak with the chairwoman of the NTSB, and she told me that, she is renewing those calls for those longer cockpit voice recordings. The NTSB wants them to not just be 2 hours like they have been, but rather 25 hours so that they can better investigate these types of incidents. Take a listen to part of our interview.
What's going to happen in the future when we have even more of a congested airspace with drones and air taxis and everything else that's coming online? We have commercial space launches and re-entries almost daily. That's a lot of pressure on the system.
And that was in response to my question when I asked her, was the airline industry overstressed at this point? And she said that that's something that regulators and that the airline industry, as well as, pilots, airports, will have to take a close look at. Hallie, you know that the surge in demand in the airline industry has really surged since the pandemic. And this is something that, many people are asking, is this a training issue? Is it a staffing issue? Why are we seeing this increased number of so-called runway incursions over the last few weeks and months, Hallie?
I mean, that's the big question here. There's another question that didn't really come up here that flight attendants want to know more about, and that is the way that passengers are behaving. We've seen a spike in kind of bad behavior on planes really since the pandemic started. Obviously, 2021, 2022, and the mask mandates started to go away. Those decreased. But I know you're talking with some of these flight attendants who feel like this issue means so much to them because they see it every day.
And that apparently, Hallie, did come up in these breakout sessions, also according to the readout that I was just reading from.
Oh, good.
The
what did it tell us more?
Flight attendants unions, they well, Hallie, I will. No, they basically say that this is something that needs to be taken a look at. And the FAA, the head of the FAA, has repeatedly said that these violent incidents on flights will not be tolerated. And it's something that, the staff, the flight attendants, pilots, they are concerned about. You just listed those numbers increasing. So this is really something, holistically, that the FAA is really trying to get the summit together to discuss these problems before they could turn potentially catastrophic. All it takes is one major mistake, and God forbid there could be a huge loss of life. They want to prevent that.
That's the goal to it all here. Gabe Gutierrez, 6:19 Eastern time, and we're getting a lot of important information now out of this breakout session. Thank you for bringing us the latest here live on NBC News Now. Appreciate you. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who says keeping money flowing to Ukraine may not be in our best national interest. Today, he's getting a personal invitation to see just where that money's going. The Ukraine Foreign Ministry saying, hey, Governor, come on, drop in for a visit. They want him to, in their words, get a deeper understanding of Russia's full-scale invasion and the threats that poses to U.S. interests. So Ukraine is not happy with DeSantis's comments, and neither are some Republicans in the building you're seeing live right here, Congress. There are some new divisions now in the party because of this. You have some senators, like Roger Wicker of Mississippi, the top Republican on the Armed Services Committee, saying this to NBC News. Listen.
I completely disagree with his statement. I think clearly we have an interest in Eastern Europe. We have an interest in our NATO neighbors. We have an interest in allies like Ukraine, friends that we made solemn promises to.
What Roger Wicker's talking about here, right? The idea that there are divisions now inside the party on this matters because Ron DeSantis is getting closer and closer to a 2024 announcement. He's heading to Iowa. He's given campaign-style speeches. He's asking for cash from some big money donors. NBC's Julie Sirkin is joining us now live from Capitol Hill. And this has been, over the course of the last 24, 48 hours here, Julie, something that members of Congress are certainly okay to talk about. These divisions that they have with the Florida governor, you're hearing a little bit of the attitude of like, okay, we are dealing in the Senate with foreign policy every day. We know how real this issue is. Hey, Ron DeSantis, what do you know about Russia and Ukraine here?
Yeah, that's exactly right, Hallie. And look, as he weighs getting into the 24 race, he's paying attention to the voters that will potentially put him in the White House in the first place, the MAGA base. And I have to tell you, at the top of their list is certainly not continuing support for Ukraine. At the top of their list is securing the southern border and all of this rhetoric we continue to hear from Ron DeSantis' potentially biggest opponent here, Donald Trump, the former president. And so when I talk to Republicans today who are on his side, two of them who actually didn't support this aid back in May when it was a standalone package. They certainly didn't support it in December either. They're saying exactly that. Take a listen to part of my conversation with them.
I made it really clear to the White House that I don't want to send any more money or funds to Ukraine until we secure our southern border.
So bottom line, you would be against any more aid for Ukraine?
Not unless it's matched or exceeded by the EU, who, by the way, is in a better financial position than we are as a country.
Yeah, so look, this is coming at such a critical point here in the Capitol. We've been hearing about this for months now. We reported back in October that this was a calculation that some Republicans were afraid that if Republicans took over the House, there would be no more Ukraine aid in the future. It's why we saw a $45 billion package passed in December. So Speaker McCarthy, with his tight margins, with his very slim majority, he's going to be listening to the words of DeSantis and Trump because they are still the crux of this party.
How worried should the Ukrainians be about getting cut off from Congress here, sort of given where some members of the Republican Party are at right now, Julie? Like, how real would that concern be?
Oh, it's very real. I mean, if you look at European allies and our NATO allies, they've been basically following what the United States is doing. They've been following President Biden's lead here. So if the U.S. was to pull back to stop all aid, the war against Ukraine would still wage on. Russia would continue stepping up their aggression, but our support would dry up, and that would mean our European ally support would dry up too.
Julie Sirkin live for us on Capitol Hill. I know you've been working the hallways all day, Julie. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, schools in one of the country's biggest districts might be about to shut down for days. We'll tell you what's going on when we take you live out west next. Plus, an NBA star for one of the league's top teams has just been suspended with no pay. That's coming up in the 5 Things. Stay with us. In just 1 hour from now, out on the West Coast, teachers and school workers in one of the biggest school districts in the country will say when exactly they're going to go on strike at a rally in Los Angeles, putting kids out of the classroom for days, potentially. 65,000 teachers and counselors and nurses and cafeteria workers, they're all in unions, and those unions are in negotiations with LA's school district. And right now, those negotiations are kind of not going anywhere, according to the unions. The superintendent is already saying that this 3-day strike will probably close down hundreds of schools. All of it as the district is spending millions of dollars to try to get a handle on all the learning loss from the pandemic. I want to bring in Nyala Charles in downtown Los Angeles, where things are picking up behind you, Nyala. They are getting ready for this rally to begin, in a place where there is a real history of tensions between these teachers' unions and the leadership out in L.A. Talk to us about what's led to this moment and any chance for like a breakthrough in the next 60 minutes here.
Well, Hallie, the last big strike happened in 2019 before the pandemic, and both groups say since then, with inflation, their needs have grown. They both want salary increases, more staff, and also more benefits. The teachers are here in solidarity with the educational workers, which are custodians, janitors, teachers' assistants. On average, those people make about $25,000 here in Los Angeles. The teachers making on average $80,000, but both groups saying they're struggling to make ends meet. Here in Los Angeles, the rent is more than, on average, $2,000 a month. So listen to what one of the teachers we spoke to says about this. The proposed strike would last 3 days and happen in about 2 weeks. Take a listen.
We're good teachers. We won't let them get behind. We will help them catch up. With this, with the 3 days, we're going to easily be able to catch them up.
The superintendent says that they agreed to meet the workers with a salary increase about halfway, but still that's not enough for the people here. And as you can hear, Hallie, it's getting louder. The frustrations are very high. And when you mentioned, is there a possible breakthrough? Well, one of the workers, the president of one of the unions that I spoke to, says if those demands are met, they're looking at wanting a 30% salary increase for those educational workers, then there could be a breakthrough. But until that happens, they say no deal.
So interesting. This also fits into kind of the bigger picture, not just where you are in LA, Nala, but across the country. We've covered it a lot on this show. Teacher shortages, the issues that schools are having because teachers, frankly, have felt really burnt out from the pandemic and what they went through then, and what students and parents had to go through.
Right. Life has only gotten harder since the last strike back in 2019. And that's what a lot of the people here are saying. They need more resources, and they say more resources within the school district only helps students more. A lot of parents' concern since the pandemic is that issue of learning loss since then. So they say at this point, students need more resources, not less. And a lot of that begins with teachers and the other people who work at the school. Hallie?
Nala, Charles, thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, Texas officials say they're taking control of Houston's public schools, which have nearly 200,000 students. Back in 2019, the state started making moves toward a takeover after allegations of misconduct by school trustees. Since then, most of the members of Houston's school board have been replaced. Democrats say this whole thing's political. This is one of the biggest school takeovers ever in this country. Number 2, the NBA suspending Memphis Grizzlies star Ja Morant for 8 games without pay after that video you just saw came out of him holding a gun in a club earlier this month. The NBA says, I'm quoting here, that his conduct was detrimental to the league. He's already missed 5 games, so 3 more, and he'll be able to play on Monday. Number 3, Honda is recalling 500,000 cars in the U.S. and Canada over a defect that could stop the seatbelts from latching properly. We're talking about the Honda CR-V, the Accord, the Odyssey, the Insight, the Acura RDX. Look them up online. We've got it posted for you there. Owners can get a replacement seatbelt buckle at your local dealership for free. Number 4, NASA's James Webb Telescope is out with a new image of a very rare sight, a star just about to explode. Wait, is this blowing your mind? This is so cool. It's a Wolf-Rayet star. That's the name for the very short phase that some stars go through right before they die and then go supernova. Look at that halo around the center. The stars cast off outer layers of gas and dust. God, like, space is amazing, you know? You know what else is amazing? What are amazing? Frenchies. French bulldogs, because guess what? They're #1, baby. Sorry, Labs, you are no longer the top dogs in America. The American Kennel Club says the French bulldogs are now the #1 most purchased dog breed. About 108,000 Frenchies were registered last year. That record for 31 years belonged to the lab until it was broken by that little sweet Frenchie face. Tonight, there's a fight playing out between students and their school over what it means to be an all-women's institution. Wellesley College students voted that the school should let transgender men and all non-binary people apply. But the student vote is not binding, meaning the school doesn't have to follow it, and they're not gonna. The school's president, in a new statement, says today there is no plan to revisit our mission as a women's college or our admission policy, adding that they will work to continue to build an inclusive academic community. Right now, the school accepts transgender women, not men, and non-binary people who are, and I'm quoting here, assigned female at birth and who feel they belong in our community of women. I want to bring Stephanie Gosk into the conversation here. And Steph, this is a fine line that the school appears to be walking here. Talk us through it.
Well, it's interesting because the student body says it's not a fine line, that they've actually made their choice, that Wellesley no longer is a women's college, that they accept transgender women, that they allow students who are currently going to the school to transition, and they allow non-binary applicants into the school. And they're saying, look, if what you care about is inclusivity, and that's the tradition of Wellesley College, then you should also include transgender men in that equation. And the school is saying, well, no, we want to stick to our transition. Students took this vote. As you say, it's non-binding, but they are sending a very strong message, and it's really a generational one, Hallie.
We are seeing more and more all-women's colleges over the years that have expanded the definition of who they accept. Can you talk through, and I know that there's not, as you point out, there's not many like all-men's or all-women's colleges left, but what does it mean for the ones that are left? Can we draw some conclusions here?
Well,
is it too early to do that? What can we say?
Yeah, we chatted in the last hour, and we talked about this, and I went back to the Google to find out how many schools there actually were. 26 There are 26 all-women colleges right now in the U.S. That's down from 281 in the 1960s. There aren't many of them. Now, there are some, certainly in the elementary school ages and private schools, there are some, but it's not a big number. I think what this story really is, Hallie, is this kind of microcosm of the conversation that's going on around the country. Back when these schools were established, it was a very binary thing. There are men and there are women. In our culture today, there are a lot of people who really don't see it that way. They see different genders and gradations and all sorts of people in between, and they want those people to be included, and they especially don't want them to suffer because of who they are, and they are looking for ways to protect them. And that's really what you're seeing here.
Stephanie Goss, thank you very much. Appreciate it. When we come back here on the show, there are some apps you probably use every day that might be hurting your brain, maybe even having the potential to lead to dementia. What you might want to know before you reach for your phone in the car, coming up. Some breaking news. We just found out that Virgin Orbit, the rocket building company owned by Richard Branson, is pressing pause on all its operations for the next week, and they're furloughing nearly all their employees while the company tries to find more money to keep going. This is according to our friends over at CNBC, who say the company executives have just made this announcement in a staff meeting in the last hour. Those same executives say they'll give an update on where their funding and staffing stands sometime next week. So a lot of us might rely on, like, we can't go anywhere without using Apple Maps or Google Maps or Waze or whatever GPS you like. And now researchers are saying, hey, maybe don't use an app. Like, maybe use your brain to get you from point A to point B instead. That's because researchers say that these kind of map apps could lead to cognitive decline, maybe even dementia, because basically they do all the thinking for you. Let's bring in Dr. John Torres. What? Because, like, is this for real, Like, meaning, come on, we all use our map apps. Like, that's it. When I was a Cub reporter back in the day, I was, like, using, maps to navigate around Sussex County, Delaware. That is not a thing that people have to do anymore. Is it really that bad for your brain that it could even lead to dementia?
And Hallie, the honest truth is we don't know, but we do think that it is one of those things that could be contributing to dementia. And it's certainly one of those things, if you don't do it and you use a map and a compass in particular, then it's one of those things that could help prevent or at least slow down dementia as you start getting older. And what we do know is when you are using navigation, you're using part of your brain, that's important to keep your cognition going. And one of the early signs and symptoms of somebody who's suffering from dementia is them not being able to find their way back home. So you can see here that hippocampus is important because it's important for memory, navigation, and that type of mental mapping, being able to figure out where you need to go. And that's what this orienteering does. I went down to southern Arizona and had an orienteering competition, which is essentially using a map and a compass to go from point A to point B to point C to point D. And there I met Kathy. She was 73 years old. She was as sharp as can be, and she actually hiked me into the ground. But while she was doing it, she was having a wonderful time. Here's what she had to say about the competition. Are you doing this for fun? Are you doing this for exercise? Are you doing this to keep your brain healthy? All the above?
All of the above. I do it for exercise. I do it because I love the puzzle, solving the puzzle.
So that orienteering is important, keeping it active. But for those who can't go out and orienteer, simple things like turning off your GPS in your car, trying to find a different route home, exercising that hippocampus part of your brain is important, Hallie.
A lot of people use GPS. Like, I will be honest, maybe not a lot of people. I often use the GPS to places that I know where I'm going just to see what the traffic's going to be like which route should I take? Should I stop doing that too?
Not necessarily GPS, and it's a wonderful device. I use it all the time, and it's one of those things that can get you from point A to point B, but occasionally turn it off, occasionally try a different route, especially if you're out on a hike. Try using a map to go from point A to point B and discovering new ways of doing it, because one of the things we do know is exercising your body exercises your brain. So the things you can do to keep your brain healthy are, number one, you want to keep as healthy as possible. Eat right, make sure you get plenty of sleep. That exercise, that playing that puzzle game, that's part of the puzzle, pun intended, of keeping our brain healthy. And if you look at orienteering, it does exercise. You're out on a hike, and we went up and down hills. You're playing puzzle You're playing puzzle games, which means you're trying to figure out on this map. They give it to you 5 minutes before you start, so you've never seen this map before. And social interactions, which was not on their graphic, but is extremely important to keeping your brain healthy. It's a big social interaction. Everyone's helping everybody else out. There's no competition to this. Everybody is really trying hard to make sure everybody else is having a good time. And afterwards, they all get together and essentially have a barbecue.
And maybe some beers. Dr. John, for those of us who are not orienteers that are watching, would Sudoku also be a good, like, you know what I mean? Should we still, like, crosswords still good?
Yeah, Sudokus, puzzles, those kind of things, but you have to exercise as well, and you have to make sure you get out and socially interact. Very important.
This was your first time orienteering?
Well, in the military, we did something similar, but the first time orienteering in the civilian world.
You just seem so hype about it. Like, I'm into it for you. It feels like you've discovered this new love, and I'm just happy for you. So, Dr.
It was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you. NBC News covers hundreds of international stories every day. And because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our foreign desk has done it for you. Here is some of what they're watching in a segment we call The Global. In Thailand, officials are expanding their search for a metal radioactive cylinder that is missing from a power plant. Nobody has seen this thing in days, and health experts are warning that being exposed to that radioactive material for a long time could cause rashes, could cause fatigue, vomiting. In Brazil, take a look at this. Melting plastic twisted up with rocks on a remote volcanic island. And some scientists say it is terrifying. Why? They say it basically shows how much influence humans have on places that are really far away. The island is one of the world's most important conservation spots for green turtles. There shouldn't be plastic there, but you see what the reality is. In Japan, cherry blossom season is starting early again this year. It's only ever started this early in 2021 and 2020. Weather officials say this trend is probably going to stick because of global warming. The cherry blossoms are expected to peak in about a week there, and then later on this month, right here, where I am in Washington. Hey, coming up, we've got some breaking news that is literally just into us. You are going to want to hear about Russian involvement in the damaging of a U.S. drone. We'll tell you what 3 sources are telling our team just now in a minute. Plus, folks in one state might soon be forced to limit how much water they can use at home. Stay with us. So we've got some breaking news, an NBC News exclusive here about a story that we started off this show with. Even though Russian officials are denying that it was one of their planes that collided with that American drone over the Black Sea at all, we are now learning from 3 sources familiar with the intelligence that the highest levels of Russian leadership gave the green light to aggressive actions by that jet. I want to bring in NBC News' Peter Alexander, who is one member of the team that is breaking this story again exclusively right here on NBC News. So, Peter, what's not clear is if this went all the way up to Putin. But regardless, this is a very interesting twist to this whole thing.
Yeah, no, Hallie, it's exactly right. Again, to be very clear, this information is coming from now 3 U.S. officials familiar with this intelligence who say that these aggressive actions, including the dropping of jet fuel on this unmanned American drone, were approved by the highest levels of Russian leadership. To be clear, dropping fuel on a drone is really an unprecedented action here. 2 of the officials said the intelligence suggests that Russia was probably trying to throw the drone off course, maybe to disable its surveillance capabilities. But the actual collision with the drone, these officials say, was likely not intentional. As for this relationship, whether Vladimir Putin was involved, one of the officials said he had gotten the indication that the sign-off did go all the way up to Vladimir Putin, but the other officials didn't provide any specifics beyond saying it reached the highest levels there. Obviously, this comes amid rising tensions between the United States and Russia right now. The Defense Secretary, Lloyd Austin, today revealing that he spoke with his Russian counterpart, that he made very clear that the U.S. military will keep flying and operating wherever international law allows. As you noted, Russia insists that this incident was, in fact, an American provocation, they say. They say that their jet never touched the drone. The Russian officials, as you've been reporting, say that they are now trying to retrieve remnants of what's called a Reaper drone in the Black Sea. That's near Ukraine and Russia. but the Pentagon, Hallie, as we've been reporting out, says it erased the sensitive information before most of the drone. The Joint Chiefs Chairman, Mark Milley, today said likely sunk in as much as 5,000 feet of water. Hallie.
Peter, you're making an important distinction here that I want to drill down on for a second, because what you're saying is that what was approved based on these three sources familiar with this intelligence by the highest levels of Russian government was the fuel dumping, right? The sort of provocative, rare act from the Russian jet onto this U.S. drone. What was not apparently appearing to be intentional was the actual collision itself. Do I have that right? And why I think that's interesting is I wonder how or if that complicates what the U.S. has been seemingly trying to do, which is turn the temperature down on some of this.
Well, I think you're right here. Again, this is based on an assessment, and we're learning it through this series of U.S. officials right now. Obviously, a final assessment hasn't been made, but the assessment, the information they're sharing with us at NBC News is that these aggressive actions, including what they did, which was dumping, pouring effectively that jet fuel on the drone, were being approved, had been approved by the highest levels. That's not the only thing that these Russian jets did. They also basically flew by this drone about 19 times. But as for hitting it, as one U.S. official told me late tonight, they said it is possible that this was just a reckless, incompetent piece of aviation by the pilot, not necessarily intentional. Hallie.
Peter Alexander, it is excellent reporting by you, Kara Lee, Courtney Cubey, Moshe Gaines. Thank you for bringing it to us here live on NBC News Now. Appreciate it. Back here at home, we've been telling you all about the rain, the deadly flooding out west, but none of it has done much to relieve the really bad drought out there. In Nevada, you now have lawmakers coming up with new rules to try to limit how much water people can use in their homes. And 7 states are negotiating for whatever the future will be for their water supply that is getting lower and lower, again, even with all this rain we've been talking about. If these states can't come together on a plan soon, the federal government's taking over and may make the call on what cuts need to be made. NBC News correspondent Steve Patterson went to check in with folks who are worried about their water along the lower Colorado River Basin.
All right, so we're right outside of the Los Angeles Bureau, right? This is something rare for this city, which is one of these winter rainstorms. It's going to dump thousands and thousands of gallons of water on top of us, swelling the LA River. Take a look at this thing. So this should end the drought, right? Well, not quite.
That's because precipitation in California has no impact on 1/4 of the water source here, the Colorado River, which has been in a 23-year-long drought. This year, the U.S. government is planning to announce cutbacks in Colorado River water to the 40 million people who use it. To assess that impact, we started below Yuma, Arizona, with Tom Davis, general manager of the Yuma Waters Association, providing water to farmers along the U.S.-Mexico border.
What happens in 5-10 years when there's still no resolution? Do you see that scenario? Are you worried about that?
Do I see a solution? I don't. If the drought persists, the reservoirs go dry. It's that simple.
We drove through acres of farmland, giving us a glimpse at why this area produces most of the winter vegetables grown in the U.S. between October and April. Eventually, we found ourselves on the other side of the border wall, but still on U.S. soil. After a few miles, we had to turn around. The U.S. Border Patrol was processing migrants who had just come across from Mexico, so we doubled back to get a good look at the river.
Now, we're on the other side of a wall. But that doesn't mean we're in Mexico, right?
That's right.
Okay. So
that's right.
Well, let's walk. Where are
we?
Over here, it looks like a riverbed.
It is.
Is that the Colorado?
That's the Colorado riverbed right there.
Why is it dry?
Yeah. So this river is always dry at this point. So that's the border. This is the United States. That's Mexico.
That's
right over
Mexico
there.
On the other side.
On the other side of the border.
Here, the river is always dry. At this point, California, Arizona, and Mexico have already siphoned off their allotted amounts of water.
The fact that it's dry here, a symbol of that?
It is. Every drop of Colorado River water in the United States is accounted for.
From Yuma, we went to Imperial County, California, the other key producer of winter vegetables and another big user of Colorado River water. Just outside of Holtville, we found Jack Vessey's farm. Jack was kind enough to drive us to one of his fields being harvested.
We're farming approximately like 10,000 acres.
10,000, yeah, it's big.
Yeah, I told you it's gonna be beautiful.
It's harvested in a windstorm. How about that? Let me grab one of these. Thank you. So this is just part of just
Crop safety?
Yeah, food safety.
Food safety.
Yeah, it's mandatory. Our standard operating procedures is that everybody wears a hairnet to go out in the field.
What else have you had to do to sort of mitigate because of the crisis? Does it feel like you guys are being asked to do too much?
No, I mean, I think as a farmer, most of my neighbors and the farmers here locally, we understand that we need to be part of a solution.
It works so fast and so efficient. It's amazing. Look how quickly they are with the knife. They put it into those boxes and they ship it right off to the grocery store.
Irrigation runoff from farms like Fessie's flows north into the Salton Sea, the biggest lake in California. But as farmers conserve water, the sea has been drying up. And as the winds picked up, so did the dust.
What do you see when you look out the window?
It's hard to see anything, Mitch. It's really hard to see anything. It's dust everywhere.
We headed right for the heart of the Salton Sea to a restoration project aimed at reducing all that dust from areas of the dried lake bed by restoring wildlife habitats.
Hi there.
So it's a very windy day.
Very windy, as you can see. So watch out, it's very uneven surface here. Definitely don't want to have any accidents.
Yep.
So you'll see here we have a very soft soil, and then it gets a lot harder. So
yeah,
there you go.
That feels a lot better. So this is here, but this is what it's all about, right? I mean,
yeah. So as you can see here, the sea is receding.
Yeah. How fast is this receding?
When I started working here, this was underwater.
All of this was underwater.
All of it was underwater.
Where we were standing, was this underwater?
Totally underwater.
We would be underwater right now.
Absolutely.
Wow. Okay.
Yes.
Hi. Can you get that back at this point?
You would need to have some sort of a flood event.
Steve Patterson is joining us now live. So, Steve, I think if I'm looking at your shot, I think I know very well that river that you're next to there. It's the one behind the bureau, right? Like, it is always dry. And I'm so struck by something you said that is really important here, that even with all the rain you've been getting in California, which is rare, that doesn't matter. That's not going to overcome this drought stuff.
It's not. You know, this is rare, and there's water in all the right places, right? Especially where it counts. There's significant snowpack in the Rocky Mountains. That directly feeds that river system. There's about 120 to 150% of what we would normally see of snowpack up there. The problem is we're talking about a 23-year mega drought. So the soil up there is really dry. It may not all run off into the river. The problem really now relies on human intervention. We can't rely on Mother Nature anymore. It's going to take intervention at the state or federal level, which means cutbacks on water. It means conserving the water that we have right now. That's the only way. Hallie?
That's it. Steve Patterson, great to see you. Thank you. Still to come here on the show. It is not a done deal yet, but Aaron Rodgers says it's pretty close to it since his mind is made up about where he'll take his talents. We'll tell you more about the next move for this kind of lightning rod of a QB coming up. We don't say this a lot, but we're going to say it tonight because the Jets could be a Super Bowl favorite next season. I'm not the one saying that. The odds makers in Vegas are saying that. Why? Because of this guy, controversial quarterback Aaron Rodgers from Green Bay. He says he wants to play in New York for the Jets, but he says the reason that he's not actually a Jet yet is not actually his fault. Nothing is done yet, as Rodgers says, but his longtime left tackle, David Bakhtiari, is saying his goodbye online with this gif of a guy getting all choked up about it. Corey Robinson, are you as choked up as David Bakhtiari is? I mean, like, this is Aaron Rodgers has become kind of a lightning rod for the league here. And he's clearly he's in his feelings about leaving the Packers and trying to go to the Jets here.
Yes, you know, it's an interesting dilemma. You know, I think anytime you're replaced by your employer, especially when you feel like you're playing at a high level, it can get kind of in your feelings. But the thing that's so interesting here, Hallie, is the compensation package. I mean, Russell Wilson, when he was traded for to the Denver Broncos, we're talking a quarterback, a tight end, a defensive end, 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, and a 5th-round pick. You know, so like, what are you going to get for like an MVP level type of guy in Aaron Rodgers who still has a couple more years of being a gunslinger? I don't know what you're going to get for him.
Couple more years left to be a gunslinger. That's how Aaron Rodgers see it, right? He's going to the Jets to try to win. I mean, that's presumably his goal here in doing this. He's also doing it in a way that feels savvy, and I don't mean that like in a bad way or a good way. I mean that in a neutral way. Like it's a very high-profile sort of.
Yes.
dribbling and traveling and like, oh, is he going? Is he not going? He's like, I'm gonna go. I wanted to go. Like, there's a lot around this. It's similar but different to the whole LeBron James decision. Remember when he was going to take his talents to South Beach? Not quite as wrapped up in a pretty media bow, but there is a media awareness from Rodgers here.
Oh, certainly. You know, he definitely talking about media savviness. Aaron Rodgers is like right at the top there, you know, with a guy like Tom Brady. What's interesting though about this whole thing is it's a leverage play. You know, just last week, you know, the Packers said, hey, look, this isn't our first choice. Let's try to get a win-win. So you think, okay, that knocks down the trade value because you know that the Packers they're ready to move on. And then Aaron Rodgers says, hey, I don't even want to play for Green Bay anyways. I want to go play for the Jets. And then that says, okay, well, this is an untenable situation now. You know, it seems like, you know, what we're going to ask for Aaron Rodgers, like, you have to get rid of him now. What are you going to do, just release Aaron Rodgers and let him walk away? He just signed a 3-year, $150 million deal.
Right.
So then he says, okay, well, I was going to retire. So that's what I'm saying, Hallie. It seems all much like a very much a leverage play trying to get that trade compensation.
Trying to get those numbers to go up and those players to come in. Corey Robinson, lovely as always to chat with you about the NFL and all of the drama happening there. Appreciate it. Lovely to be with all of you as well for these last couple of hours. That does it for this hour, but we will have a lot more for you here tomorrow, same time, same place. Top Story with Tom Yamas starts right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.